Welcome back to my channel. My name's Lucy and I share videos on the topic of long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome and mind-body approaches that can be used for those conditions and other mind-body conditions. Today's video, I wanted to talk about internal family systems and how this can help you with these conditions and the ways that I used this approach. I have made a video about this before, but people still ask me quite a lot about how I've used IFS, and it might be helpful for me to just explain it in a slightly different way. Hopefully this will give you a few ideas of how it can be used. So what I'm sharing is not medical or mental health advice. I'm sharing ideas based on my own experience and based on my reading. So internal family systems is a form of therapy that was developed by Richard Schwartz. And basically it looks at how we are made up of different parts of our personalities or of ourselves in a way that guide what we decide to do, how we behave, and what we think. One really easy way of understanding how this plays out is thinking about day-to-day examples of when we might use language around having different parts of ourselves. So if you are making a really difficult decision, it might be the case that you have one part of you that really wants to say yes to this opportunity of whatever kind it is, and then a part of you that wants to say no and doesn't want to take the risk or is fearful of the outcome or is fearful that you'll regret the decision. It's having those opposing feelings within you and just naming them different parts of you and trying to understand the part that wants to say no, the part that wants to say yes. Another example might be when we think about our personality traits. So for instance, if you really identify with being an introvert, it might be that you have a part that feels really tired and exhausted after socializing. Similarly, if you identify as being an extrovert, you might have one part that really enjoys socializing a lot and feels energized by socializing. If you think of yourself as a perfectionist, it might be the case that you could say one part of me is perfectionistic. And this goes with many other things like people pleasing, being an achiever, maybe feeling anxious or having a part that feels anxious in certain situations. It might be that you have specific attributes that make you different to other people, and those could be described as different parts of you. So one of the reasons it's really helpful to think about different parts of ourselves is that we can get more information and clarity through self-reflection. So if I'm reflecting on a perfectionist part that's within me, it might be that I really try to understand, okay, when did this perfectionist part decide I should do everything perfectly? And why did it decide that? Was it in order to protect me from doing a bad job or from failing or to try and fit in? Or did it get this message that it's good to be perfect from others around me? And learning more about the role that these parts play can help us understand them better and also have a sense of self-compassion towards the parts of us that sometimes might make life a little bit more difficult, because whilst a lot of these parts are really helpful in many areas, there are also other times in life when these parts make our life more challenging because of the role that they play. For instance, wanting everything to be perfect might mean you're not getting projects finished. I'll get to the point where this really relates to health. But just to mention a couple of books that are really good on this topic, if you're interested in learning more, there's a book called No Bad Parts and a book called Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts. They're both written by Richard Schwartz, who developed this model. And even though it's a type of therapy, you can use a lot of IFS on your own. So I benefited most from IFS by reading books and just applying it myself to myself. If you want to go deeper and try to help parts of you that may have experienced trauma or bigger challenges in the past, then finding a therapist that does IFS might be a good idea for something like that. So most of the parts that we think about on a day-to-day basis are known as protector parts. And these parts are trying to help us in some way, and they've learned a way of being or a way of behaving or thinking that is designed to help us cope better in life and to protect us from being triggered. So there are parts also called exiled parts, and these parts often hold pain from the past. So it doesn't need to be from a highly traumatic event. It could just be that we were ignored as a child, we were neglected to some extent. It could be that we had a fright as a child, even though it wasn't anyone's fault. It could be from anything really, that as a child a difficult experience happened and a part took on a sense of pain and suffering as a result. And as a child, making sense of a difficult event often means internalizing, thinking that it is our fault or that it means something about us, because children are very self-centered and they think about what it means for them. So if they were in a difficult situation, they may have thought, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not perfect enough, I don't fit in. And these thoughts might not have been conscious. Or it might be that a part of you has these thoughts, but you're not aware of that part. Because the protector part developed around the same time that these exiled parts experienced some type of hurt or pain. And they developed a coping mechanism in order to help us prevent being in those situations again. So one example is if as a child you were upset about something and you went to your parent or your caregiver crying, and your parent or your caregiver said, you're okay, stop crying, go out and play, carry on, don't worry about it. The parent may have just been doing their best. They may have thought that was the right response to give, and it doesn't mean anything bad about the parent by giving that response. But the child may have interpreted that as, my feelings aren't important, I shouldn't feel my feelings, I shouldn't express my feelings to others, I should just get on with it. If I have a problem, I shouldn't speak about it. And it might be that that child learns that, especially if this happens again and again, that it's better not to rely on others or to express emotional pain to others. And that child might develop a protector part that is highly independent, or a protector part that is an achiever, that is trying to have a strategy that avoids a situation like this. So maybe the perfectionism plays out in terms of always wanting to be perfect, not only in day-to-day tasks and goals, but also in terms of how you handle yourself in relationships. And maybe the perception is to be perfect, you don't share things, or to be perfect, you keep certain things to yourself and you try to be as strong as possible rather than being vulnerable and open. Another part that may have developed could have been a highly independent part. So a highly independent part might try to rely on themselves, not rely on others, not share with others, not ask for help. And these parts can help us in certain areas, but they might also affect how we manage day to day. And the primary purpose of these parts is to try to prevent our exiled or hurt parts being triggered. So some other examples of parts would be firefighting parts, and these parts would be parts that act in haste in order to make sure that we don't get triggered. So imagine a situation where someone says something hurtful to you. A firefighting part might decide to drink a lot of alcohol, or binge eat, or binge watch a TV series as a way to cope, because it's trying to distract you from a more vulnerable part of feeling the pain of the hurt that was caused. One of the most important parts is also the self within a person, which is different to the parts. And the self is calm, confident, connected, has a sense of creativity, clarity, and is generally grounded and relaxed. So if you notice you're feeling particularly emotional, it might be that one of the parts within you is in the driving seat and it has become reactive because of a specific trigger. If you are in self energy, it's more likely that you are able to feel relaxed, feel at ease, and feel good within yourself. So being unwell with any long-term health condition will involve parts of us feeling triggered in some way, but also taking on different roles around the situation of being unwell. Some of the parts that we might have had even before we were unwell, their role might actually be quite challenging whilst we're unwell. So if you have an overachieving part or a people-pleasing part, they might do things that you actually shouldn't do when you're unwell. So for instance, a people-pleasing part might say yes to going to an event when your health's not good enough or you're not ready to do that just yet. An achievement part might put a lot of pressure on you to get better quickly and to do really well at recovery. And that might just drive your nervous system into feeling more dysregulated because of the additional pressure and stress. A perfectionist part might feel that any time that you get symptoms again, it's a sign of failure and that you are not doing well enough in recovery. And it might really struggle with the nuance and the grey areas of a recovery process and having to learn through setbacks, because a perfectionist part will often react when things don't go perfectly, but that perfectly is really, I suppose, unrealistic in many instances, including recovery. You might have a part that wants to ignore your emotional experience. So this was the most important thing for me in learning IFS for my recovery. I had a part, or more than one part, that dismisses my own experiences and my own emotions. And that meant that emotions were being repressed, that I wasn't aware of emotions, and they were affecting my nervous system, they were affecting my body and causing symptoms. And when the symptoms came, I would get distracted by trying to fix the symptoms, by trying to figure out what was wrong, by feeling anxious about the symptoms, by researching. And all of this was a really big distraction from actually the main emotion or cause of the symptoms, which was a feeling or emotion I wasn't aware of. When I came across the Mind-Body Prescription, which is a book that explains the mind-body approach, I applied internal family systems approaches to this work of becoming more aware of emotions. One way that I did that was, when symptoms would get worse, I would ask myself, how do different parts of me feel at the moment? And nearly 100% of the time I would have at least one part that would say, I feel fine, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. But then if I asked or waited a little bit longer, I might actually notice that there was a part of me that was a bit anxious, or there was a part of me that was frustrated, or there was a part of me that felt triggered by a situation that happened the day before or a few days before that I just hadn't really even thought about. And doing this helped me become aware of the emotions that I was previously unaware of that were driving my symptoms. So just becoming aware and acknowledging, oh, a part of me feels a certain way, helped to reduce my symptoms. Sometimes it was a bit more than acknowledging, so it might involve writing down what the feelings were. So if a part of me felt angry, expressing through writing that feeling of anger and doing it as much as I could, tapped into the actual feeling. One of the reasons that this IFS approach helped me so much with becoming aware of emotions was because I could identify and acknowledge the parts of me that didn't really want to do any of the emotional work or be aware of emotions. And by noticing them and identifying them, I could ask those parts to just give me a little bit of space and time to pay attention to some other parts so that I could become aware of emotions and essentially help myself feel better in the long run. I still have these parts that don't like to pay attention to emotions, and they probably take over a good amount of time in my day and in my week. So this is something I still need to try and work on and do. It's something that can be really effective and really helpful and really interesting. And it can take time also to work on, especially if it's been a pattern over the course of your whole life. Other examples of parts that can come up in recovery could be a part that is always doubting recovery, or a part that feels like a victim because of what's happened and because of how difficult the situation has been for you. You might also have a part that really wants to fix the symptoms and change the symptoms, or fix the emotions and change the emotions, and doesn't want to be accepting of the situation at all. And of course, accepting the situation doesn't mean saying I'm never going to get out of this. It just means being able to have a tolerance and ease with the symptoms that you have at a given time, or the emotions that you have at a given time. A lot of people with these health conditions have personality traits like perfectionism, achiever traits, people pleasing. Often people have been anxious for a long time before they got unwell. Some people have used sport a lot as a way of managing emotions. And often they're quite resilient people because they're used to pushing themselves through difficult situations. And with recovering from a long-term health condition, sometimes it involves developing a different set of skills to the ones that have helped you so far in achieving different things in your life. So getting to know different parts of you can be really helpful in making sure that no part is really holding you back from recovering in a certain way that it's trying to cope. So it's trying to help you, but in helping you, it might actually not be so helpful for recovery in the strategies it's using. And there's different ways that we can get to know parts. So we can ask parts, what age is the part? When did it develop? What's its earliest memory? We can ask parts, what would they be afraid would happen if they didn't do their role? What are they protecting you from? We can ask parts, if they weren't spending so much time on being perfectionistic or achieving, what would they like to spend their time doing? We can help parts feel seen, understood, validated, heard, and valued just by paying attention to them and listening to them with some self-energy. So with the energy of being curious, being calm, being interested, non-judgmental, and being able to accept how a part is feeling right now. So this can be a good way of learning to be with emotions in a healthier way than just pushing them aside or ignoring them. Because if we think of it by breaking ourselves up into these different parts, it can help us just imagine this part is, a young child and it doesn't know any better, and this is the way it learned to cope. And by listening to this child or this part, we can understand where it's coming from and why it's doing what it's doing, or why it's thinking the way it's thinking, or why it's feeling so scared. And this can be useful for that part to actually start to feel more seen, heard, validated, understood. And that part might gain better confidence in you to make good decisions and to provide a sense of safety to those scared parts, or those parts that do not feel fully safe and feel they need to protect you from something. So working on this can be useful in many ways because it helps us develop more self-compassion. It helps us become more aware of our inner experience. It can help us become more aware of our emotions. It can help us become more aware of any resistance that we have towards noticing emotions, being with emotions, or noticing symptoms and being with symptoms. Of course, often we do notice symptoms pretty easily. They're often so severe. The IFS model is very good for using these tools to become more self-reflective and to understand what's going on in a compassionate way. Sometimes there's parts of us that we might think, I don't like this part of me, or this part of me is really getting in the way. For instance, if you have a part of you that fears doing activity because you've been unwell for so long, you might think, this isn't helping me, I don't want to fear doing this. But when we think of it in terms of this is one part and it has a really valid reason to fear activity after what you've gone through, it helps you to think about it in a more compassionate way, and it helps to figure out what's going to work for that part to gain more confidence and to feel a bit better about approaching an activity that's harder for it to do. So these changes don't occur overnight. It takes some time, and becoming aware of emotions or feelings that different parts might be holding, again, is not something that will necessarily happen overnight. And there's different ways of doing this. There's different questions you can ask. I think sometimes it's hard to explain in one video how I used IFS because it's a process of interacting with parts in different ways in different situations based on what the concern is for that part or what the emotion is that that part is experiencing. It's a really useful way of learning how to be with yourself and regulate emotions yourself. And for instance, if you become triggered, you feel really anxious, you feel really low, you feel really upset, rather than feeling like you have to get support from someone else, it can be a really nice way of learning how to do that for yourself. Of course, it's good to get support from others as well if you're struggling in some way, but knowing how to do it for yourself is also really empowering, because you might actually be able to do a better job at giving yourself those resources and helping yourself in that situation compared to the person that you might normally go to, because they don't fully understand, and not everyone has the response that we want to hear in those moments. But if you are able to understand that part a bit better and what response that part wants, you can be the one to give that part that response. There's various different ways that IFS questions and tools and perspectives can be used for mind-body symptoms, as well as for the recovery process itself. Some of my videos go into more detail about specific areas and parts work, and I might do more videos like this if people want to see videos like this. But there's also an individual element where asking if a part is experiencing a different emotion might help a lot for one person, but another person might need to use this approach differently. And then there might be other people who do not resonate with this at all, and that's fine. It doesn't need to be something that everyone does. It is a really helpful and useful approach for many people. That's why I talk about it. That's why I've shared how much it's helped me with my recovery, because I know that a lot of people also find that it's very useful, a very useful tool for them as well. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. If you're interested in coaching, there's a link to booking a call with me in the description. If there are any other particular videos you'd like me to make, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.